I think most of you are familiar with her, just been released from prison, thank God, but or from house arrest rather. But anyway, this is someone that, you know, we're not going to let you form a government. So the military has been in control since that. Well, they're actually in control since the 60s. But that happened in 1989, 1990, as I recall. Maybe my Burmese colleagues are correct me. Are you from Burma? Is that right? The election was in 88? Okay. So, I mean, that's like what, 22 years? So for 22 years, this country has been controlled by an unrecognized military organization. So I don't even like to call it a government. So, but why am I saying this? Every time there's a problem, you know, sometimes, I'll be honest with you, even some of my Thai colleagues, when I talk to them, they'll say, well, you know, that's, we don't want to talk about the Burmese, that's their problem. People say internal problem, that's one of my favorite comments. You say it's an internal problem, but every time there's a difficulty, you know, there's difficulties with people coming across the border. There's difficulties with the fact that, you know, and these are people. I mean, you know, you can't just say, well, they belong to somewhere else. And this was Kennedy's point, and it's just as valid now. So I think, especially as educators, we have to think as a global community. And that's really what this night tonight is about. Obviously, we can't solve all the problems here. But I think one of the biggest things we can do, and one of your questions, in fact, that one of you are going to get as a group and present on, is the whole awareness issue. If we can raise awareness. And you know, sometimes awareness can be curative, right? I mean, I don't want to say anything. I mean, I hope, Jerome, you're not overly sensitive to this issue, but I mean, if you look at the issue of awareness, right, in America, up until the 1970s, really, up to the 60s, you know, you look up until the 60s, African Americans were terribly treated. In fact, in the South, you know, people, you could drink at the same water fountain. You know, if I was in a water fountain, Jerome had to go drink at a water fountain over here. Okay, this is yours. And of course, the water fountains for the African Americans, they were dirty, they weren't properly maintained, just like the restrooms. I mean, I got this nice clean water fountain here. When I get on a bus, he's got to sit in the back of the bus, even if there's seats in the front. And then if he runs out of seats, he has to stand up. It doesn't matter that he got on there first, it doesn't matter. And that's not that old, that's 45 years ago, right? And you know what changed a lot of that? There's a lot of things that changed it, but one of the biggest things that changed it is awareness. Because people had not really thought about it, because a lot of white Americans have been able to just sort of say, oh, well, those blacks, we don't worry about them. We just put them over there, and we won't think about it. Right? Now, I'm simplifying. It's not just awareness, but awareness was a huge part of it. And now schools all over the U.S., schools in the southern states, celebrate things like Black History Month and talk about what some of these people risks that some of these people took to make the country better. Not only for white Americans, but for all Americans. You know, if you ever get a chance, I highly recommend listening to Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Because if you listen to that and you don't get a bit of a chill going down the back of your spine, you better check yourself for a heartbeat. Because maybe, you know, I mean, because it's pretty moving and powerful. And what he was about was, it's a global message. It applies to all of us. You know, I hesitate to say this, but you know what? Dr. Martin Luther King could come here and give, if he was still alive, he could come here today and give the same speech and just replace African Americans with Rohingya Muslims in Burma, or with Karen people in Burma. Or he could talk about some of the Muslims in the southern part, Mindanao in the Philippines. It's sad, but the same issues are still going on. And he could talk about some of these kids too. Because what's being done to these kids is horrible. And the problem is, sometimes as you think you start to solve a problem, and you do, but then you run into, and one of the things they say in here, which is like, there's two issues to this. One is the aid part. It was more than two, but two big issues. One is the aid piece, whether they were providing the funds so that these countries can improve the lives of these kids, right? That's one part of it. But the other piece is, we have to get them to spend their own money on education. There's a scary statistic that's in there, and I find this really, really scary, is that they talk about North America and the European countries, and they spend 5.3% of GNP. Now, if I get this wrong, you can correct me, because I'm going from memory, and if somebody has it in there, I'm off slightly, that's okay, you can correct me. But I think this is pretty close to the truth. This is the European countries in North America, kind of like that, right? And they're spending 5.3% of GNP on education. Now think about this. These are rich countries. These are developed countries. These are countries with a lot of opportunities. And they're still saying education is important enough, we need to spend this much money on it. But then when you look at the least developed countries, the poorer countries, the countries that really, really should be pushing their education system because they need to improve in order to bring themselves out of poverty. Because one of the best ways to get out of poverty, in fact, it's sometimes really the only way. You got to educate yourself. That's the only way to get out of it. You educate yourself out of poverty, and it sometimes takes 2 or 3 generations. But the poorer countries that really need to spend the money, they're spending 3.3% of GNP on education. Now, to me, there were different numbers. This is sort of an average of the different indicators. To me, this is really, really scary. Okay? Because, to be honest with you, these guys should be spending maybe double what these guys are spending. Because first of all, they don't have much money to spend. So you're talking about 3.3% of, say, $5,000 available per family, maybe less, right? Maybe you're talking about 3.3% of $1,000 per person if you take GNP and make it per capita, make it per person, right? Okay, because I obviously don't have the numbers in my head, the actual GNP. But let's say you take it, you might be talking about $1,000 a person. So you're talking about 3.3% of that 1,000, right? Hey, over here, you might be 15, 20, 25, 30,000 in some of these countries. And you're spending 5.3% of that. So it's a realization, that's an awareness issue, getting these countries to accept that, hey, this is important, we got to spend money on this. Our own money. Aid is great. And we do need to give these countries aid. I'm not sitting there saying, oh, let them figure it out for themselves. And also in many of these countries, to be honest with you, if you look at Africa, for example, a lot of the problems, I mean, not that I'm trying to say anything about my race, but if I really want to be completely honest, if you want to look at it from a racial point of view, which is always dangerous, but there's a lot of truth to this. If you want to look at Africa, most of the problems in Africa, if you go back far enough in history, were created by my race, by the white guys. The people from Europe. And I say that because I'm talking now before really North America was even populated.